We're joined now by former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo and Brendan Buck, former staffer to House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan. Carlos, I want to start with you. Family separations were politically unpopular, not just with Democrats, but with Republicans. Not to mention, they're now legally banned. So why suggest a move that could lead to more families being split up? And how would they even put this into practice, given that it's been banned by a court judge?
Well, that's right. Immigration is an issue where Donald Trump and Republicans are on offense, right? We know that it was the weakest issue for Joe Biden during his presidency. It was a very weak issue for Vice President Harris during her campaign. And it was really the issue, just like in 2016, that Donald Trump emphasized the most and got elected doing so. So Republicans definitely have public support for addressing the immigration issue in a meaningful way, but there is certainly risk there if they get too aggressive, if they come across as cruel to innocent people, to people who are in this country not committing crimes or not cheating, but just trying to live in peace, then that there could be a backlash. And like you said, not just among Democrats, but also among Republicans in Congress who are probably going to face some headwinds in the 2026 midterm election. So there is a careful balancing act here, even though Republicans do have the wind at their backs when it comes to the immigration issue.
Yeah, Brendan, I want to ask you about that exact thing. You know, there was this swell of public opposition to the zero tolerance policy the first time around. Could Trump be undercutting his own support if they, you know, pursue these cruel policies?
Yeah, the how is really important, not just the what here. I mean, immigration enforcement as a concept, very popular. And there's a lot of things that Donald Trump could be doing in a few weeks here, a few months, that I think would be really beneficial to him. If he's able to stem the tide of people coming across the border and put in really strong border enforcement, I think that will be really popular. When it comes to the interior enforcement, though, as Carlos said, significant risk. And I think Donald Trump appreciates that. When he gets asked about this in any more specificity, he always pivots to, well, we're just going to start by going after the criminals and the dangerous people who are here. Now, that's much easier said than done. If people knew that there were dangerous criminals here, we would be deporting them already. So I think he understands after the experience of his first term that there are ways that you can do this that become really unpopular. If we know anything about Donald Trump, he wants to be popular. I think Tom Homan here is a political liability for him. Tom Homan clearly has so much zeal for this issue and so much disregard for the views of other people on this, that if he sort of let loose to run wild on this, he could do some things that I think would be very damaging to Donald Trump politically, not to mention, the real world effects of these people who are in this country. So I think this is something Donald Trump and his team need to keep a close eye on, not just letting Tom Homan do whatever he wishes.
Yeah, for a Republican coalition that seemed really on the same page when folks went to the polls in November, we're already seeing these divisions within the party. And Carlos, right now there's this feud brewing over H-1B visas. I mean, if you've spent any time on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it now, it's getting really ugly. On one side, you've got folks like Elon Musk and tech executives who are favoring loosening restrictions on visas for skilled workers. And then on the other side, you've got Laura Loomer and, mega nationalists on their feeds tweeting away and slamming the idea. Is this an early test of which faction is going to dominate in this administration?
Well, for sure. And I think this is also going to play out in the House of Representatives, as Brendan knows and remembers well. The Republican Party has the 5 families in the House, right, which is the way they describe the different groups that make up the House Republican Conference. And there are people who will likely find some common ground with Ms. Loomer here and start attacking Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, and some of President Trump's biggest supporter. So this is definitely going to be a complicated process. The irony is that immigration is probably the issue where Republicans are most united. I think tax policy will end up being a lot more difficult. But even though they have momentum, even though the country wants to see greater immigration enforcement, border security, there are these divisions among Republicans, and some of these positions are really kind of out there. I mean, these visas are important to the country. They're important to our economy. Employers need people to do these jobs. So this is a good example of how complicated life can be, particularly in the U.S. House next year. That he assumes the gavel again, which I believe he will.
Brennan, I'm wondering, when you look at this Republican coalition and these competing ideologies that are kind of emerging within it, do you think it's durable? I mean, we're even seeing factions within the supposed cabinet. Can they hold this all together? Will this all get worked out in the wash as they start to govern, or is it a real risk factor?
I mean, it's going to be messy for sure. And I think what ends up happening is you just don't focus on these areas where we've got disagreement. We've got agreement on border security. We've got some level of agreement on what enforcement looks like. But this issue, which sort of comes down to, do you want to allow sort of the best and brightest from around the world to come to America and use their skills here and benefit our economy? Or do you hold a view that that just steals a job from an American and there should be no immigration? And that is what a lot of the nationalists are saying. That is, I would say, a minority view, but it's been one that has been in Republican politics for a long time and has prevented us from doing anything on immigration, because you can never get everybody on the same page when it's a question of not just, how do you handle people who are already here, but what kind of legal immigration system do you want to have, and what kind of things do you want to reward? I imagine they'll just punt on this issue, say we're not going to focus on this, and find areas of common ground, because they're going to have plenty of various things that they have to do, like funding the government, like tax reform, like a debt limit, that's going to have them divided in the first place. And there's only so many fights you can take on as a leadership. They'll hold it together to the extent that we have held it together for the last 10 years or so. But there are some very deep divisions within our party. And certainly the Trump era has elevated some of those more nationalist voices that were much more a minority voice. And I think they have much more sway than they ever have before.